MAKAVELI the Don till I'm gone. He was saying this shit while he was alive. Yeah, he was telling us. We were talking about it. Nigga, I'm a legend. I'm putting in mine. You better put in yours, because I'm a legend already.
Man, history a legend. You define me. John MAKAVELI being.
Camera. Rolling. Action.
My life in exchange for yours.
Alrighty now.
Ambulance on Fairfax and Wilshire. Please, Los Angeles. We have a man shot.
Only Gab can do it like this.
Yo, YouTube, what up? It's your homie Gab. I'm in the building. And this is MAKAVELI Media. Today, we're joined by a very special guest. He needs no introduction. A lot of you guys know his work. Former LAPD Detective Mr. Greg Kading. How you doing, sir?
Hey, Gab. How you doing, buddy?
Man, it's good to finally have you on the program, man. Murder rap is a big deal. Murder rap was an extremely big deal. Let me ask you a question before we get started. How does it feel that murder rap has become like the reference point for all Tupac and Biggie related subject matter? How does that feel knowing that started with you?
Well, you know what? That's actually a great question. I don't even know how to answer it because I haven't thought about it in that context before. I don't think about it being, I'm just glad that it served the purpose that it was intended to serve, and that was to educate people on what we discovered in the investigation, and then, of course, people can evaluate and make their own decisions about it, but I just felt there was an important, element of responsibility to put it out there. So I'm glad that it's kind of taken on a life of its own, and it's led some other platforms to get the information out there.
Does it bother you at all when people try to discredit what you was able to find as far as the confession from Keefe D, or how people seem to reflect on how you got the confession from Keefe D? Does that matter to you one way or the other?
No, I don't really take any of it personally, and I think that there's just a lot of naivety and kind of willful ignorance sometimes by people. They don't understand the way that these investigations work. They don't understand some of the protocols and dynamics of these investigations. They get complicated, and doing ruses on people or getting leverage on people in order to get them to cooperate. That's all routine stuff in law enforcement. But when you're outside of law enforcement, it may not sit well with you. But these are the kind of games we have to play if we want to make progress in cases that are otherwise stagnant.
Yeah, it's good points, really good points. How did you feel the first time that you actually heard, the confession actually come out Keefe D's mouth? Did that, blow your mind? Because it blew my mind to actually hear what he had to say for the first time. How did you feel when you first obtained the confession?
Well, I was elated, but, hopefully you wouldn't have seen that on my face. I think when we were sitting there in that conversation and gathering that information and trying to be as stoic and professional as possible, but at the same time, getting that type of level of evidence, testimonial evidence, eyewitness, co-conspirator evidence, that's huge. And after all the effort we put into it, it was like finally, we'd accomplished that goal. And so I was elated inside. I was really, really stoked about it.
Yeah, because, to me, and I've said this several times, the very first time I heard Hit 'Em Up.
First off, in the click you claim, West Side, when we ride, come equipped with game.
I'm not going to go into the whole story because I told this story a million times on my channel. But the first time I heard a Tupac song, Hit 'Em Up, I actually knew that somebody was going to die. I didn't know who. I just got, very bad vibes coming from the song. And to actually hear through the confession from Keefe D that, Hit 'Em Up actually played a role in Puffy's allegedly putting a contract on not only Suge Knight but Tupac as well. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that more than anything else, more than any other song, more than any other situation where it's just kind of, a war of words, that song set the tone of what was really going on. Those weren't just words. Those were feelings, and they set the tone for the environment that was going on at the time, which led to all this other violence and mayhem. So, that song, above anything else, I think is a very insightful way of understanding how hostile things had gotten.
Were you surprised that Keefe D gave you P. Diddy's name so easily?
I guess so, kind of. Of course, we took it with a grain of salt at first because we're sitting there having this conversation. We knew of the association. That was well established. There was a connection. But for him to then go and say there was this solicitation, which we also had, some history of knowledge of. There was always this idea that maybe that Chris had killed Biggie out of retaliation for an unpaid debt. And so then to have Keefe D sit there and say, yeah, in fact, there was a debt, at least from his perspective, it kind of it connected those dots. But then, of course, we had to, take into consideration, okay, how valid was this agreement? What was the nature of it? What was the context that these things were said in? So yeah, we had to look at it from all different perspectives.
Now, what amazes me is that so many people have access to P. Diddy. You see all these journalists, you see him giving interviews. I've never heard anyone come out and ask him, does he know Keefe D? Is he familiar with the allegations Keefe D is making towards him? Do you think Puff Daddy is able to avoid this line of questioning?
Well, maybe there's agreements ahead of time. When you set up these interviews, maybe that's an agreed upon thing that you're not going to discuss that or you're not willing to discuss that. So there's one option. Also, I think people know that would immediately shut down an interview, potentially. If you're trying to have a productive interview and you start to ask questions that somebody doesn't want to answer, they could just shut down your interview. So there's, and then again, he's a maverick. He's an icon. He's a billionaire. He's a guy that you're going to probably treat with a certain amount of reverence and respect if you're a reporter. So it's a question I would certainly ask if I had a microphone in my hand standing in front of him. That I guess other guys just aren't that interested in asking that question. I don't really know.
Because these are some very strong
allegations. Yeah,
allegations, right? That he's making towards Puffy. Just to have Puffy, not say anything about it is just amazing to me. And nobody has even not challenged him, but really asked him about it. Not just did you murder Tupac or not, but the fact that you have a guy who's putting his name and his face out there saying these things about you, and it's just like it flies over top of everybody's head in the room. Do you ever have any conversation or any backlash from P. Diddy's camp about murder rap itself?
No, not really. There was just prior to the actual publication of the book, there was an article written in the LA Weekly, really exhaustive article, and it speaks about the allegations that are forthcoming in the book. And evidently, they reached out. The people at the LA Weekly reached out to get a statement from Diddy, and he said, yeah, this is just utterly ridiculous, or there's no merit to it, or something to that effect. But that's the extent of any feedback or response that I've ever seen from him. And, I think that his silence is quite interesting. and his intention to just avoid it all and ignore it all, I think is somewhat telling. Typically, when you're accused of something that you're not guilty of, you defend yourself. And so, but again, as I've always said, there's very important nuances to this whole story and the whole dynamics of what was going on between everybody at the time. So I always feel a responsibility to throw that in there. I think, Puffy was genuinely in fear for his life and didn't feel like he had other options than to try to protect himself. And one thing led to another, and of course now two great rappers are dead.
Yeah, that's the tragic outcome of this whole situation. What is your relationship like today with Keefe D? Do you speak to him at all, or you guys on speaking terms, or their ship is already sailed?
Oh yeah, no, there's no relationship there. I mean, our relationship was simply as police officer, suspect, and police officer informant. And then after I had retired and was getting ready to publish the book, I went and visited him and just said, I want you to be aware of the fact I'm putting this information out to the public, and I feel a responsibility to you because there might be some, backlash or retaliation. But that was it. Last time I ever spoke with him, many, many years ago, and it was just to let him know that this was all going to go public, and then that was it.
Now, holding the type of information that you had, because this is, very vital information, on every level imaginable. Knowing what you had in your possession and knowing the ramifications that could come from it, did you ever feel like your life was in danger, or, you were in harm's way in any way, shape, or form just by having, these items?
No, to be honest with you, I've never felt in danger at any time in relation to this case or to this whole saga. I'm a cop, and I'm doing what a cop does. You investigate things, you try to bring the truth forward, and the people that are on the negative side of that equation, the Keefe Ds or anybody else, they know that I'm not here lying against them. That would be a problem for me if I was out here making false allegations against somebody. Then I could see there being a potential problem for me. The Keefe D knows everything that I'm saying is just a repeat of what he told us